Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on defining social learning theory. I am your host, Cecilia Dunn. We'll begin with a brief introduction to social learning theory, followed by an overview of who Albert Bandura was and the core components of his theory. We will identify the different types of models within social learning theory and then review the case study. From there, we will explore how both nature and nurture have shaped the client's development, discuss attachment-based family therapy, and how it may support the family, and consider key developmental factors. I will also outline how I would assess developmental needs and family dynamics, as well as how I would intervene. We will conclude with a summary and references. We'll examine who Albert Bandura was and the key components of his social learning theory. We will also explore additional developmental models, such as attachment-based theories, and consider how they may support the family in therapy. Next, we will review a case study in which I will identify the social learning theory models that inform systemic work with the family, as well as specific models presented in the client's life. I will then examine the role of nature and nurture in the client's development, including what he may have been born with versus how he was raised, the influence of his environment, and the overall impact of nature versus nurture. Finally, I will explain the therapeutic model selected to support the clients, along with the developmental considerations that inform this choice. There's a lot to unpack, so let's get started. Albert Bandura was a psychologist who developed social learning theory in the 1960s. He began publishing his findings on the theory in 1971, and by 1977, he had released another major work and presented social learning theory as a complete research-supported model. This model included a well-known Bobo doll experiment conducted between 1961 and 1963. Bandura's perspective on learning differed significantly from B.F. Skinner and Ivan Pavlov. Bandura did not dismiss reinforcement theories entirely. Rather, he believed reinforcement served as a motivational factor rather than a primary mechanism for learning. He proposed that observational learning is a key pathway to which people learn, in the social context, meaning that cultural norms and language and environment could influence and shape behavior in either positive or negative ways. Exactly is the social learning theory. Although Albert Bandura developed this theory, it was influenced actually by several prominent psychologists and philosophers before him, including John Locke, Pavlov, Skinner, Piaget, and Vygotsky. Bandura built an earlier behavioral concepts such as direct reinforcement, rewards, and consequences, but believed that these ideas needed to be expanded to include mental processes and cognition. Bandura had observed that people could simply learn by watching others without even having to be reinforced. He challenged the idea that behavior is driven solely by external forces or unconscious motives. Social learning theory is grounded in four key processes of observational learning, which include attention, retention, and reproduction and motivation. Bandura believed that we are constantly learning from our environments through this observational learning, encoding behaviors into our memory so that they can be recalled and reproduced later with the necessary physical and cognitive efforts. So I'm going to read the case involving the Hopkins family. George presents for therapy with his son Isaiah. George is a 48-year-old black cisgender male. Isaiah is a 17-year-old black cisgender male as well. George reports that Isaiah has recently become confrontational with him. He states that when Isaiah doesn't want to do something, he will ignore George, and if George pushes him on it, he will yell. George reports that Isaiah's mother, Lily, works away from home and stays out of town most days. She is typically with the family 1 or 2 days a week. George states that Isaiah's behavior is usually worse towards his mother, but that lately he has been argumentative with George as well, and Isaiah reports that he's bothered a lot by his parents' requests and that they ask him to do stuff when he is busy playing his games. George admits that when it's just the two of them, Isaiah is often on his own a lot after school, and that he doesn't ask much of Isaiah. He states that when Lily's home, they try to do more and ask a lot more of Isaiah, but Isaiah reports that he feels like his mom doesn't understand him and makes a lot of demands on him. George states that when he is also concerned about Isaiah's schoolwork, which he feels has been declining lately over the months, and that he feels like it is pointless to even try. George reports that his biggest concern is that Isaiah will not finish school and that he will not have a good life. He also worries that if Isaiah is confrontational with others, that they will see him as a threat, and he could end up being killed or arrested. He states that this has never really been an issue before, but he's concerned about it becoming more problematic, especially now that Isaiah is close to being 18. Let's identify the models present in Isaiah's life. Let's begin by briefly reviewing the 3 types of models in social learning theory. There's live modeling, which occurs when a person learns by observing something else perform behavior while it's live. In Isaiah's case, he has likely been influenced by watching his dad George's behavior towards him, particularly George's avoidance of conflict and emotional withdrawal. Isaiah may imitate these patterns in his own relationships, mirroring George's tone, his body language, and his tendency to shut down during moments of tension. Let's look at symbolic models. They also play a significant role in Isaiah's development, such as looking at social media influencers who express emotions similar to his, such as maybe detachment or frustration with parents or authority, musicians and artists whose lyrics reflect anger and irritation with parents or a distrust for the authority, interactive games or potentially violent video games where peer groups he identifies with, cultural narratives about what it means to grow up as a young African American guy, expectations of strength, of self-reliance, and emotional restraint. Like guys don't cry or feel bad. Identifying symbolic models is important because they shape how family members cope, influence our emotional states, and help the therapist to understand Isaiah's views of himself and his identity. The verbal instruction modeling occurs when behaviors are shaped through spoken or written directives. For Isaiah, this may include verbal criticisms or commands, such as being told to stop talking back or do better in school. Verbal instruction can also come from his own internal dialogue. For example, George telling him he's raising Isaiah on his own and doing the best he can, which may influence how he interacts with his son. Isaiah's mother also contributes to verbal messages expressing frustration that Isaiah does not follow the rules when she's away, or communicating the pressure and the stress she feels to keep him on track. She may criticize Isaiah for not listening and dismiss his feelings due to her own stress and frustration. And these 3 forms of modeling, live, symbolic, and verbal instruction, are essential components that the therapist will examine more closely during the assessment process. Through the development psychology and Bandura social learning theory, we can understand that contrasting yet complementary explanations of what nature versus nurture encompass. Nature refers to the biological and genetic influences on development, Behavioral genetic research shows that individuals with different genetic makeup develop distinct personality traits and temperaments and behavioral tendencies. Even siblings who share the same biological makeup and parents and are raised in the same household can appear very different because each child inherits their own unique combination of genes. Genetics also influences physical characteristics through dominant and recessive traits. Research further demonstrates that although siblings may share these similarities in temperament or personality, they can still differ due to prenatal experiences such as exposure to hormones, maternal stress, or variations in nutrient availability. In contrast, nurture, as emphasized in Bandura's social learning theory, highlights the powerful role of environmental factors, birth order, cultural influences, peer groups, parental treatment, life experiences, and broader social context all contribute to shaping behavior. Bandura argued that children learn behaviors through observational learning by watching how others act and imitating those behaviors and modeling what they see in their environment. Through attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation, children acquire social behaviors from the people around them. The core focus of attachment-based family therapy, ABFT, is to help families such as the Hopkins families to recognize and repair the relational instability. ABFT in particular is effective for strengthening relationships between parents, caregivers, and their adolescent children. The assessment process begins with a clinical interview. Attachment-based therapy provides an emotionally focused and highly structured approach. It teaches families interpersonal skills while addressing engagement, trauma, emotional safety, and connection. ABFT is especially beneficial for adolescents who are at risk of developing harmful behaviors. When working with the Hopkins family, the therapist would focus on understanding their experiences, histories, and relational patterns such as harsh demands or criticisms from parents, and how these dynamics are affecting Isaiah but also the family. It is clear that the family needs support in learning how to interact with one another in ways that promote safety and connection. A key goal is to help Isaiah view his parents as supportive figures he can rely on. In family therapy, it is also important to help caregivers understand that the process is not about assigning blame. Instead, ABFT emphasizes strengthening relational bonds and fostering emotional connection within the family system. Developmental considerations and how it informed my selection. Adolescence is a critical time in cognitive, emotional, and neurological development. At 17, the prefrontal cortex is still maturing, which means there's a higher order functioning, such as planning, impulse control, and emotional regulation that are not yet fully developed. And during this stage, adolescents strive for autonomy, while simultaneously continually relying on parents for guidance and emotional support. It is also a time when young people are actively forming their sense of self and identity. Daily challenges in school and romantic interests and peer relationships become central, and peer groups often take precedence over parental relationships. Family dynamics can also shift during this developmental period. As parents age, they may face increasing work demands, health concerns, or transitions such as retirement, all of which can influence their emotional availability and capacity to remain present for their children. In considering attachment-based family therapy, it's important to examine the impact of an insecure attachment on the Hopkins family. Without intervention, an adolescent like Isaiah may carry these attachment insecurities into his adulthood, potentially experiencing chronic feelings of abandonment and loneliness and difficulty forming stable, fulfilling relationships. So assessing the family dynamics, we're going to look at having a culturally focused perspective. It's imperative to have an understanding and skill about the cultural background of the family. gaining an understanding of their culture and how their culture affects them as a whole. By examining their beliefs and what they value and what they perceive as normal in their lives, from both the parent's perspective and Isaiah's, will really help guide the counselor to tailor an intervention for the family. Treatment goals can be consistent with principles of the social learning theory because, as we can see from this case, to study the family presented a family structure that really is not effective. They're lacking in communication and boundaries, and their lack of communication, discipline, and structure prevent the family from being able to problem solve properly. In assessing Isaiah, I would want to examine the cognitive beliefs and in developing communication skills with his parents. So let's take a look at the therapy I would choose and how I would intervene as a therapist. To begin the intervention process, I would administer the adult attachment interview. This is a structured psychological interview which helps to assess the parent's internal working model of attachment, their beliefs about relationships, and the ways that their own caregivers model behavior for them. Understanding these narratives provides an essential context for how attachment patterns may be influencing their interactions with Isaiah. I would also examine their live, symbolic, and verbal models influencing Isaiah's behavior from their perspective. This includes identifying which behaviors receive attention and which are ignored, whether negative outbursts are advertently reinforced or whether parents reward compliance while punishing emotional expression or attempts to share his own perspective. Next, I would provide a clear explanation of the attachment theory and introduce the ABFT model. It is typically delivered in 16 to 20 sessions, though it can be adapted for brief or extended treatment depending on the family's needs. Early in therapy, I would continue assessing family interactions to understand their unique relational patterns and challenges. I would also review informed consent and outline the treatment plan. ABFT is organized around 5 core treatment tasks designed to help families address relational ruptures and reach therapeutic goals effectively. One of the primary aims is to shift the family's belief that the adolescent is the problem, and instead foster a collaborative approach in which the family works together towards healing. Another essential goal is to understand why the adolescent does not turn to their parents for support and emphasizes that meaningful change requires participation from everyone. We would then establish a treatment contract, ensuring that all family members agree on the structure and the goals of therapy. The overarching aim is to help the family build a more secure attachment relationship. Alliance with the adolescent. I would meet with Isaiah individually or with his parents when appropriate to understand his narrative, particularly where he perceives breaches of trust or emotional disconnection. This step helps to prepare him to express his feelings openly and safely. Alliance with the parents. Next, I would meet with the parents to understand their perspective, stressors, and relational histories. This includes exploring whether they should meet together or separately, validating their experiences, and examining how their own attachment histories influence their parenting. The goal is to help parents recognize their role in the relational patterns and motives towards change. Attachment tasks, repairing ruptures. In this phase, we explore Isaiah's account of how he feels and how his experiences have affected him. The therapist coaches the family in expressing disappointment, hurt, and unmet needs in a constructive way. And this includes preparing Isaiah to communicate his feelings to his parents and helping the parents to respond with empathy rather than defensiveness. Competency promoting tasks. Finally, we address broader stressors in Isaiah's life, such as school and challenges in peer relationships and family expectations. This stage focuses on building autonomy, strengthening trust, and supporting the adolescent's emotional and cognitive development. Throughout the process, the therapist acts as a coach, helping the family to learn to navigate difficult conversations, resolve conflicts, and regulate emotions that come up, and increase emotional awareness as well. This is a summary, and in this presentation I reviewed Bandura's social learning theory, emphasizing how adolescents learn through observing and modeling the behaviors of others. Using the Hopkins family case, we examine how live, symbolic, and verbal models shape Isaiah's emotional and behavior responses. We contrasted these environmental influences with behavioral genetic findings, strong heritability contributions to temperament and development. And finally, we introduced attachment-based family therapy as a structured, evidence-based approach for repairing relationship ruptures and strengthening parent-adolescent bonds. Thank you for being a part of this presentation. Here are some of my references that I used. Thanks again, and that's it for now.